I parked my 10-year-old Toyota Corolla at the very edge of the circular driveway, its silver paint dulled by too many winters, and its muffler still rattling faintly as the engine shut off. The other cars glinted under the aspen sun like trophies lined up for exhibition. Uncle Gordon's jet-black Bentley, Sloane's Porsche Macan with custom rose gold trim, Tyler's brand-new Tesla Plaid, and here I was, Charlotte Rivers, 34, single, financial consultant, allegedly the poor one in the Rivers family, at least according to the whispers that never seemed to die. I glanced at my reflection in the rear-view mirror. Simple navy blazer, clean bun, no makeup except lip balm. My grandmother's pearl earrings, the only heirloom I ever cared about, glinted just enough to catch the light. I took a slow breath and grabbed the brown, leather briefcase from the passenger seat. It held the contract that would rewrite everything they thought they knew about me. The mansion hadn't changed. 3 stories of Georgian red brick and symmetry, with white columns rising like sentinels at the entrance. Behind its grandiosity lived the ghosts of every Rivers legacy moment: weddings, galas, strategy sessions, and betrayals. The autumn air smelled faintly of pine and history. I climbed the limestone steps one at a time, the sound of my boots muffled on the thick welcome mat. Before I could even raise my hand to knock, the door opened. "Miss Charlotte." Martha's voice carried all the warmth I hadn't heard in months. She wrapped me in a cinnamon and lemon polish hug. Same as always. "Look at you. You're the spitting image of Miss Eleanor this year." I smiled faintly. She would have known better than to schedule this circus during off-season. Martha chuckled, then her voice dropped. "Mr. Gordon's been here since morning. Moved the whole meeting schedule. Said there's urgent financial matters this year." Of course he had. I followed her inside, the marble floors cold even through my boots. Every hallway was dusted, every light perfectly dimmed to suggest affluence. But the air felt tighter than usual, like the house itself knew it was about to be sold to the highest bidder. Upstairs, my old room was waiting for me. Blue walls, white shelves, and the same window seat overlooking the rose garden my grandmother had tended herself. Nothing had changed except me. I placed the briefcase on the bed. Inside were 12 property deeds, 3 corporate structures, 1 portfolio summary, and 1 title document for the very building half of my family now lived in, clueless about who signed their lease renewals. They'd called me poor, every year like clockwork, a casual jab at dinner. A joke slipped into conversation about my car, my apartment, my refusal to accept help. Tyler once joked I should start a GoFundMe for a new outfit. Sloane had offered to let me borrow something Chanel next time with a laugh. Gordon had suggested I let him mentor me in real estate basics. I never corrected them. I didn't need to. Until now. Tonight, they'd raise a toast to another year of power, polish, and privilege. Tomorrow, they'd vote to demolish this mansion for luxury condos. And on Monday morning, they would all find out that the person they dismissed as a shadow had been quietly buying back their legacy behind closed doors. I opened the briefcase, fingers running over the top document, embossed, notarized, and worth more than any of their cars. My grandmother had taught me that true wealth doesn't announce itself. It waits, and then when the moment is right, it speaks. By the time I turned 16, I already knew how to read a mortgage contract better than most realtors in Denver. Not because I was precocious, not because I was brilliant, but because I had no choice. After my parents died in a car crash on Highway 82, coming back from a modest bed and breakfast near Telluride, the Rivers family wasted no time labeling me as the family's charity case. My father, Thomas Rivers, was the youngest son of Eleanor Rivers, founder of the Rivers Capital Group and the original architect behind the family's empire. But he'd chosen love over legacy. He married my mother, Emily, a kindergarten teacher with 0 generational wealth, and they moved to a modest ranch-style home in Golden, far from the gleaming high-rises the rest of the family called investment stock. To my aunts and uncles, That made him a defector. To me, it made him honest. When they died, the Rivers family almost fought over who wouldn't take me. It was my grandmother Eleanor who stepped in, not out of obligation, but out of something far rarer, alignment. She saw me, not as a burden, but as someone who could still be shaped. "You're the only one of them who hasn't been corrupted yet," she said on my first night in Aspen, pouring me tea in the mansion study. "Don't let them twist you." Those 3 years under her roof weren't just a sanctuary from grief. They were an apprenticeship. She never pushed me to follow her footsteps. She invited me to watch, to question, to understand. I sat in on meetings with property managers, learned the language of zoning permits, cap rates, and market cycles. She let me shadow her while she walked neglected neighborhoods, pointing out the invisible signs of future value. Subtle infrastructure upgrades, shifting school ratings, changing foot traffic patterns. "It's not about what a building looks like," she would whisper, tapping a faded duplex window as we stood on a sidewalk in 5 Points. "It's about what people haven't yet seen." She taught me to love numbers like stories. Every property had a life, its purchase price, its renovation arc, its tenant flow. More importantly, she taught me restraint. While my cousins bragged about flipping starter homes for quick cash, Grandma taught me to hold. "Don't buy what's hot," she said. "Buy what's next." The study we shared became our sacred space. That room, now sealed off under Gordon's proposed condo plans, held decades of handwritten ledgers, blueprints, and investment journals. One drawer was just for newspaper clippings about urban renewal projects. Another held letters from tenants Eleanor had helped during rent freezes and hard seasons. "Real wealth," she once told me, "is invisible. If people can see it, you've probably already lost it." Her death came during my senior year at CU Boulder. It wasn't sudden, but it felt that way. Quietly in her sleep. She left no empire-shaking surprises in her will. Just small inheritances to each grandchild, and a handwritten note tucked in the back of a ledger for me. "You already know what to do, Charlotte. The others won't see you coming. That's your advantage. Don't ever trade authenticity for access. And don't let them bulldoze this house. It still remembers." I didn't cry when I read it. I just packed up the financial journals she'd annotated, the framed picture of us on the balcony, and a tiny brass key to her study desk. Then I moved back to Denver, enrolled in night classes in real estate analysis, and took a part-time job at a commercial appraisal firm. That's where the strategy began. Not loud, not flashy, just consistent. The first property I bought was a 2-bedroom duplex off Colfax. I lived in one unit, rented the other. Every profit went back into the next one. Grandma had taught me to spot neighborhoods before the wave hit. Capitol Hill, Sun Valley, then Globeville. By the time I turned 28, I had a growing portfolio of small units across the city, all acquired through anonymous LLCs set up by her former attorney, Mr. Callahan. The family didn't know. The family didn't ask. They just assumed I was still struggling. And I let them. Every year at the Rivers Family Conference, an event Grandma started to reinforce unity, but Uncle Gordon had since warped into a flex fest. I showed up in my $49 Banana Republic blazer, shared a vague update about consulting, and endured their pity like armor. They didn't realize. By that point, I already owned 9 properties, and I was just getting started. There's a strange freedom in being underestimated. It gives you room to move, to build, to win, without anyone noticing. While Tyler bragged about his $180,000 Maserati on Instagram and Sloane posted poolside selfies from her family's winter estate in Palm Springs, I was climbing creaky stairwells in Aurora, measuring square footage in duplexes no one else wanted. While Blake showed off NFTs and angel investments in tech startups that barely made it past beta, I was meeting with zoning officers and small-time contractors, negotiating renovation bids $5,000 at a time. They were polishing their image. I was building infrastructure. From the outside, nothing about my life looked impressive. I still lived in a modest 900 square foot apartment near Capitol Hill, furnished mostly with second-hand pieces I'd refinished myself. I still drove the same Toyota Corolla my parents had left me, now nearing 200,000 miles. I still clipped coupons, still packed my lunches, still wore the same navy blazer to every family event. And they noticed. "Oh, honey, you still live there?" Sloane once said, wine glass in hand. "That neighborhood is so transitional." Blake chuckled. "Maybe you should come shadow me sometime. You could learn how real capital grows." Uncle Gordon simply offered to open a few doors for me if I was willing to work under his company's umbrella, of course. "You've got potential, Charlotte," he'd said, "but you need structure, strategy, access." I smiled and thanked him, all while my LLC closed on a commercial building in the Denver Tech Center the next morning. By the time I was 30, I owned 12 properties, 9 residential, 3 commercial. The rent from each flowed quietly into holding companies with names like Cedar Vale Partners and Horizon Vista Holdings. I filed quarterly reports, paid taxes meticulously, maintained mid-tier insurance to avoid scrutiny, and I kept everything deliberately quiet. It wasn't pride, it was protection, because I knew how the Rivers family operated. They respected only what they could see, only what sparkled. To them, quiet meant weak, modest meant failure, and if I'd so much as hinted at what I was building, they would have found a way to tear it down, or worse, take credit. That's why I made my move in complete silence. When I heard through a friend in property law that a sprawling luxury apartment complex in central Denver was going on the market, quietly to avoid spooking tenants, I didn't hesitate. The Rivers family had long mocked that building. Too dense, too urban, not our image. But I knew 3 of them lived there: Sloane, Blake, and even Tyler after his last failed house flip. The seller was aging, tired, and desperate to offload without public drama, using a carefully layered structure of LLCs and trusts, none of which bore my name. I acquired the entire property for $28 million. It nearly drained all my available capital, but it was the most satisfying wire transfer I'd ever authorized. I didn't renovate much, just improved lighting, upgraded lobby security, added quiet energy efficiency enhancements. Rent went up slightly, still well below market, but enough to stabilize margins. No one suspected anything. Not the property manager, not the tenants, certainly not my family. They kept complaining at every conference. Why would they replace the carpet with that hideous tile? Why are visitor passes suddenly required? Why is the rent creeping up? I took notes. I filed reports. I approved every single change from behind a firewall of legal anonymity. That was the final move before I returned to Aspen this year. Because I'd heard whispers, real estate appraisals being commissioned on Grandma's mansion, local permits being reviewed, Gordon meeting with developers over lunch. They were going to sell it. They were going to bulldoze the one place that still held my parents' memory, my childhood, Eleanor's legacy, and replace it with glass and steel. I'd spent a decade letting them dismiss me, letting them laugh, letting them assume, but they were wrong. I wasn't behind. I was patient, and I was done waiting. The drawing room of the Rivers estate hadn't changed since the last time I stood in it, but the energy inside had. The family portraits were gone, replaced by architectural renderings of sleek towers and glass condominiums. Where Grandma Eleanor's oil painting used to hang, a digital projector now cast blueprints onto the wall like a slow, deliberate erasure of everything she stood for. Uncle Gordon stood front and center, perfectly pressed in a slate gray suit that probably cost more than one of my rental kitchens. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice warm and self-satisfied. "This year, we're not just reviewing our financials. We're shaping the next phase of the Rivers' legacy." I slipped into a seat beside Claire, my only ally in the room. She leaned toward me and whispered, "You were right. He's going to propose the sale today." Of course he was. Gordon launched into the presentation like a politician with a private agenda. Slide after slide showed skyline views, revenue projections, phrases like highest and best use, and family equity alignment flashing across the screen. Every number was impressive, every word calculated. Then came the mansion. The screen filled with a high-resolution image of Grandma Eleanor's house. Our house, framed by golden aspens. Gordon's voice softened theatrically. "This estate has served us well for 4 generations," he said, turning toward the room. "But it's time we acknowledge the opportunity cost. Sitting on 5 acres of prime aspen real estate, currently appraised at $45.2 million, it represents a dormant asset." Sloane raised her hand, all pearls and fake concern. "Of course, we all respect the history, but emotional attachment shouldn't stop financial progress, right?" She smiled sweetly in my direction, the kind of smile people use when they're already imagining your name erased from a mailbox. I opened my mouth, but Blake jumped in first. "Speaking of history, did anyone see my new roadster outside? Limited edition. Only 20 in North America." Laughter rippled through the room, effectively shifting attention, just like Gordon intended. But I wasn't here to be distracted. "I think we should consider what Grandma Eleanor actually wanted," I said, keeping my voice calm. "She made it clear. This house wasn't just a property. It was a legacy anchor, a place for the family to gather, to remember what we stood for." The room quieted for a beat. Then Aunt Margaret spoke, her voice tinged with saccharine condescension. "Darling, I understand your sentiment, but you've never been involved in high-level real estate strategy. Maybe this is a bit above your pay grade." My stomach tightened, but I didn't blink. "I'm not new to real estate," I replied, "and this isn't just about profit. Historic value and long-term appreciation are being ignored in favor of a quick cash-out." Gordon smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Charlotte, you've always had strong opinions, but your stake in the family holdings is minimal. You've contributed little, and unfortunately, voting rights are weighted accordingly." That was true on paper. I'd kept my declared holdings small, a strategic choice to remain unnoticed. But that choice had a cost, and now I could feel it pressing in. Claire reached for my hand under the table. "Let's move forward with the preliminary vote," Gordon announced. "We'll save time for financial updates tomorrow." I watched as hands rose around the room, one after another. Blake, Sloane, Aunt Margaret, Cousin Preston, even some of the younger ones I barely recognized. Each vote another shovel of dirt on Eleanor's legacy. Claire and I were the only no's. The motion passed, just like that. Afterwards, I stepped outside into the October air. The roses were still blooming, their fragrance stubborn against the crisp cold. Grandma used to say her garden didn't care about money, only consistency. I stared at the archway where she once taught me how to identify soil acidity just by smell. I had come to this meeting with a plan, but now I had a mission. They weren't just selling a house. They were burying a value system, the same one I'd built my entire life around. And if I didn't stop them, no one would. Sunday morning arrived with a cold bite in the air, as if the mountain itself sensed something cruel was coming. The drawing room had been rearranged overnight. The cozy semicircle of chairs was gone, replaced by a long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. Leather portfolios, each embossed with the river's crest, sat at every place, setting like assigned seats at a corporate tribunal. I took mine, thinner than the rest. Of course, Uncle Gordon stood at the head, flanked by his assistant and a family attorney. Today we'll review individual contributions to the river's capital group. As you know, voting rights and inheritance structures are weighted accordingly. He gave a meaningful glance in my direction. The spreadsheets were distributed. I watched the others eagerly flipping through pages detailing net worth growth, property acquisitions, projected earnings. My own sheet listed a few small holdings, deliberately vague, deliberately unimpressive, just as I had always intended. Until now. Gordon began the roundtable updates with Brad, of course. My promotion to executive vice president increased my stake by 6%, he said smoothly, plus the Aspen property I closed last month. For bedrooms, ski in, ski out. And I just locked in pre-IPO shares on a new AI firm. Applause. Nods of approval. Even a few impressed whistles. Sloane went next, recounting how she'd expanded her luxury art collection and secured exclusive spots at a private school for her kids. 5-year wait list, naturally, but the river's name carried weight. Then came Blake, detailing another tech startup investment, a yacht upgrade, and a passive income stream he described as substantial if confidential. By the time it was my turn, the room had shifted. Several cousins checked their phones. Aunt Margaret sipped coffee with theatrical boredom. I gave my usual summary, consulting, small-scale advising, nothing too flashy. But this time I could hear my voice flattening. The words tasted like ash. Any updates to your asset profile? Gordon asked, not even pretending to care. Nothing major, I said quietly, fingers clenched under the table. Well, Aunt Margaret sighed, I do hope you'll consider something more substantial next year. You've been coasting. Coasting. A beat passed. Then Brad chimed in. She doesn't need a career, Aunt Margaret. She just needs to marry someone with real assets. The room broke into polite, controlled laughter. Sloane smirked. Or at least upgrade the Corolla. I passed it in the driveway, thought it was the gardener's. My throat tightened, but I smiled. The same way I had for a decade. The same way I always did. Gordon cleared his throat. On that note, I'd like to propose a motion, setting up a family assistance program for those members who haven't yet found stable financial footing. The room nodded. No one said my name. No one had to. I sat there, surrounded by portfolios padded with ego, and felt something shift in my chest. Not shame, not rage, a quiet, steady clarity. They would never see me for who I was. Not until I showed them. Not until it was undeniable. I excused myself early, walking briskly to the room that had once been mine as a teenager. The second I shut the door behind me, I sank into the window seat and let the tears come. Not because I needed their approval, but because I had allowed their assumptions to go unchallenged for far too long. Then I stood up, wiped my face, and picked up the phone. Mr. Callahan, I said, we're going forward. Send the courier. Full portfolio documentation, property deeds, corporate ownership records, and we need to initiate the trust transfer. He didn't hesitate. What name will the trust hold? I looked at the photo on my nightstand, me and Grandma Eleanor on the back porch, holding iced tea and laughing like we knew something no one else did. Eleanor Trust Holdings, I said, and make sure it finalizes before Monday morning. Understood. After the call, I stood by the window watching the mountains shift from gold to silver under the afternoon light. Tomorrow they would see. Not because I needed revenge, but because they needed reminding that legacy doesn't live in portfolios or penthouses. It lives in principle. Monday morning arrived crisp and sharp, like the edge of a blade. I dressed carefully, not for them, but for the moment. A tailored charcoal suit, structured and understated. My grandmother's pearl necklace. My mother's watch. No makeup beyond clear lip balm. This wasn't about show. This was about truth. I arrived 10 minutes early to the conference room, the briefcase heavy in my hand, not because of its weight, but because of everything it contained. I placed it beside my usual seat, then stepped into the hallway, breathing in the quiet. By the time I returned, the room was full. Uncle Gordon was already speaking. We'll begin with finalization of the mansion sale. The Westbrook Group is prepared to close at $48 million, with demolition scheduled for midwinter. A thick folder was passed down the line, binding agreements, spaces for signatures, proceeds laid out in exact detail. Uncle Gordon stood to make nearly 18 million. Claire and I barely a fraction. I didn't touch the folder. And secondly, he continued, Jenkins has identified leverage points for the apartment complex sale. The current owner, still anonymous, has made renovations that have caused multiple tenant complaints. If we pressure the city on permits and inspections, we may encourage a sale. I raised my hand. Gordon glanced at me with polite irritation. Charlotte, we're on a schedule. Can this wait? No, I said, standing. It can't. And then I walked to the front of the room. Whispers rippled behind me. Eyes narrowed. Phones lowered. I've listened for years, I began, voice steady. Listened to your assumptions, your jokes, your pity, and I let it happen, because I thought it didn't matter. But it does. I opened the briefcase, pulled out the first document, a financial valuation, net worth summary, audited, notarized, current to last quarter. I handed it to Gordon's assistant. Put this on the screen, please. She hesitated, then obeyed. $73,440,000. The number glowed above the Rivers family in silence, unblinking. Brad let out a sharp breath. What is that? My portfolio, I said. Claire gasped beside me. 12 residential properties, 3 commercial buildings, 1 apartment complex in Denver that housed 5 of the people in this very room. I acquired them over the past decade, I continued, pulling out the supporting documentation, through holding companies, quietly, carefully, strategically, just as Grandma Eleanor taught me. I walked to Sloane and placed a folder in front of her. Here's your lease, I said, and your rental history, including the discount I approved when you needed a temporary rate freeze during COVID. You're welcome. Her face went sheet white. Blake stuttered. Wait, you own the building? I turned to him. Yes. That new lobby tile you hate? I chose it. The guest registration policy? My call. The security upgrades? Installed after a break-in 2 floors below your unit. But you're right. 9 a.m. is awfully early for noise. The room erupted. Gasps, denials, whispered curses. Uncle Gordon rose to his feet, demanding, This is absurd. Fabricated. You couldn't have financed a $28 million property. I met his eyes evenly. I did, with growth from early investments, leveraged assets, and reinvested returns. All legal, all traceable, all mine. I placed the next document on the table. Incorporation papers for Eleanor Trust Holdings. As of 9 a.m. this morning, all my assets have been consolidated under this trust, and Eleanor Trust Holdings has finalized the acquisition of Jenkins Development Group. A long silence followed. Gordon's voice dropped. That's impossible. It's done, I said. Jenkins Development Group owns 30% of Rivers' capital voting shares, acquired slowly over time through proxy structures. You never noticed, because you never bothered to look. I turned back to the room, letting my voice settle into calm steel. I now control 35% of voting rights in this room. Dead silence. Brad stood abruptly, knocking over a glass of water. This is a trick. You've never contributed to the family. You just hid and hoarded while the rest of us built legacy. No, I said coldly. You built appearances. I built assets. While you posed for press releases, I ran numbers. While you bought sports cars, I bought roofs over people's heads. While you laughed at me, I was buying the very floors you walked on. Uncle Gordon looked like the air had left his lungs. You blocked the mansion sale, I nodded, effective immediately. Then I turned to Sloane, Blake, and the rest. You'll all remain welcome tenants in the apartment complex, as long as rent is paid and conduct remains respectful. Preferential treatment ends today. Your leases will be adjusted to market rate within the next renewal cycle. Claire was the first to break the silence. She stood and clapped, once, twice, then again. Grandma would be proud, she said. No one else moved. I returned to my seat. Let the silence settle. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. Of my voice. Of my worth. Of Eleanor's legacy. And they would never again mistake silence for weakness. In the days that followed, the Rivers family recalibrated like a shaken compass. Their conversations shifted. Their tones softened. But beneath the surface, I saw what really changed. Their math. Suddenly, I wasn't the quiet cousin in the corner. I was 35%. Gordon requested a private lunch at his exclusive Aspen Club, somewhere he'd never once invited me before. He tried to flatter, to reason. He floated the idea of strategic synergy, praising my savvy timing and remarkable discretion. But when he suggested we co-manage the new development wing of Rivers Capital together, I shook my head. I'm not interested in building more towers, I said evenly. I'm interested in rebuilding what you almost destroyed. He didn't respond, just stared at the untouched whiskey in his glass. Aunt Margaret followed with an invitation to her country estate for tea. She called me dear twice in a single sentence and suddenly found great interest in my philanthropic leanings. Perhaps we could co-sponsor a women's investment initiative, she chirped, eyes tight with calculation. I declined, politely, firmly. The only relationship that grew stronger was with Claire. Over coffee one morning, she smirked over her mug. It's like watching a nature documentary, she said. Observe the powerful alpha family members circle back to the new apex predator, hoping not to be devoured. We both laughed, the real kind, but the best moment came 6 weeks later, in a quiet corner of the now-saved mansion. Martha found me there, adjusting one of Grandma Eleanor's ledgers in the library. She placed a gentle hand on mine. Miss Eleanor used to tell me, she said softly, that you were the one who understood. Not just the money, the meaning, and I think she'd be proud. That moment meant more than every million I'd earned. Instead of selling the mansion, I transformed it into the headquarters of the Eleanor Rivers Foundation, dedicated to affordable housing initiatives and financial education for women and single mothers across Colorado. The same rooms that once echoed with power plays and boardroom ambition now held workshops and scholarship interviews. The Rose Garden became a quiet meditation space. The Grand Hall, a lecture venue for community classes. Sometimes Gordon still shows up to events. Sometimes Brad. Sloan hasn't missed a gala since the donors started recognizing me instead of her. But it doesn't matter, because I don't do it for them. I still live in my Capitol Hill apartment, still drive the same Toyota, not because I have to, but because I want to. Because freedom, real freedom, is not having to explain your choices. It's not about proving them wrong anymore. It's about knowing I was right all along. Grandma once told me, the loudest power is usually the weakest. True wealth whispers. Now I understand. It's not about displaying what you have. It's about deciding how you use it. So, if anyone asks what happened that weekend in Aspen, when the family called me poor, when they laughed at my clothes and dismissed my value, I'll tell them the truth. That was the weekend I stopped waiting to be recognized and started writing the legacy myself.